Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Folks, in my favorites folder is a fight you need to know about. At 168 pounds, Canelo right now is undisputed. Right? You have Christian Mbilli, who is unbeaten, who wants Canelo, and who is a short-range hooker. In other words, against Canelo, Mbilli would come in the pocket, stay in the pocket, have his head tucked, and be throwing a lot of hard hooks to the body and to the head. It would be a war of attrition, with Mbilli being the younger fighter. Right? But, and it's a big but, Mbilli has holes in his game. They're evident from the film of his fight from this March against Carlos Gongora, right? A southpaw who's taller than Mbilli, who can fight taller than Mbilli, right? But who decided he was going to walk Mbilli, which isn't that hard, into a left hook, right? Gongora, southpaw, the left hand, his dominant hand. So let me make a few points. First, let's talk about Mbilli. What are the holes in his game? You know, it's my belief that fighters need to have more than one skill. If you're relying off one style, I'm going to call you a fastball pitcher, right? You need other pitches. Mbilli has an underdeveloped back foot. Folks, he cannot take a step back, relax a little bit, make you miss. That's not his game. In fact, Mbilli, in my opinion, and we're criticizing an unbeaten fighter, right, with a very heavy knockout percentage. Mbilli can't have slow rounds. In other words, this is the guy who, you know, even if he's ahead in the fight by a number of rounds, which he was against Gongora, this is the guy who can't stick a jab and move. Take it easy. Take a breather. Pace himself. No, this is the Burt Cooper type of fighter. If you remember the Joe Frazier protege from years ago, this is the guy who has to be on his front foot. He has to be crowding you. He has to be throwing volume. For him, a good offense is the best defense. Right? He has to be owner of the pocket. So here, you notice, he can't help himself even when being aggressive gets him in trouble. So what's he doing? After getting caught with an uppercut in the second round, he's almost dropped. After he makes it to the 8th round of a fight he's winning, he can't vary what he's doing. So he has his head over the pocket where he almost gets decapitated by Carlos Gongora. And Gongora, keep in mind, is finding Mbilli to be so predictable that Gongora is just loading up on left uppercuts. That's his punch. Right? His idea of winning the fight is simply to catch Mbilli with the left uppercut. He's not even setting it up because he knows Mbilli's going to walk right into the pocket. So Mbilli does. It's the worst round I've seen Mbilli have in his career. He gets caught. He's holding on. He's badly hurt. He doesn't know how to do anything else. In other words, this is the guy who can't turn, have a shoulder between himself and the other guy. This is not the guy who can take steps back, force you to come to him, burn seconds off the clock. No, he's hurt. So where is he? Where he usually is. In the pocket. Right? Let me also point out too, Gongora, who had landed a hellacious uppercut in the second, who has been trying the punch the entire fight, never gets an armbar from Mbilli. In other words, Mbilli doesn't change his defensive construct to block uppercuts. He doesn't force Gongora to go to a plan B. Right? This is the pre-wired robot who has a way to get the ball over the plate at 97 miles an hour, and that's his only pitch. So let me say this. Mbilli survived, right? He got his wits about him the last minute of the 8th round. He wins the 9th and 10th rounds. He wins the fight by a margin. Understand, even in the 10th round, in my eyes, it's a little disappointing. On the telecast, the announcers are saying, oh, Mbilli's going for the knockout. Folks, that's because Mbilli doesn't know how to win rounds without going for a knockout. Right? This isn't the guy who could even take a step back and fight at mid-range or long range. It's all up close. Let me make a confession here. Years ago, I thought Errol Spence was this type of fighter. Front foot, leaned on you, always in the pocket. And then you had the Mikey Garcia fight. Spence proved me wrong. Spence came out, was masterful, showed you he not only had a back foot, he had the full back foot. Right? Let's just say I doubt I'll ever be able to say that about Christian Mbilli. Now, he's young, he's in his prime. If Canelo fights him, folks, the fight would be fought in a phone booth. But I need for people to realize that Canelo's two-handed. In other words, here, Gongora is loading up on a left uppercut. Canelo's a guy who could hit you with a left uppercut. He could hit you with a right uppercut. Right? Canelo is also a guy who has the full back foot. It's on display in the first Golovkin fight. A fight I thought he lost, but he did show you the back foot, and he showed it against a hellacious puncher on a knockout streak in Golovkin, right? A middleweight champ at the time who had knocked out several opponents leading into that Canelo fight. Canelo would have different angles than Gongora. In other words, Gongora taller than Mbilli. Couldn't really crouch and lean so that his shoulder was in the way, taking away Mbilli's right hand. Right? Canelo might be able to do that. Just understand, Mbilli is a major opponent for Saul Alvarez. Since Mbilli's 168, if I'm David Benavidez, master in the pocket, I'm looking at this film. Benavidez has an uppercut. Understand, Benavidez, unlike Mbilli, makes adjustments mid-fight, right? So does Canelo. I'm sure Benavidez is thinking to himself, wow, if they cut me the right size check, assuming Benavidez gets by Anthony Yard, right? Mbilli would be perfect for him because Benavidez would know where Mbilli's going to be, right? Benavidez had some problems catching up with Caleb Plant. In other words, if you're mobile, Benavidez has to spend rounds finding you. This guy would come to him. It would be an inside the pocket battle, right? Benavidez can throw shorter punches, has a hand speed advantage. If he's in his top gear, and Benavidez would know how to open Mbilli up to land those uppercuts, right? So let's just say Mbilli, great athlete. No question about that. Great athlete. Looks like he gains a lot of weight after the weigh-in. Excellent puncher. Limited technique. Right? He looks good until you realize that's the only style he can fight. Right? Against Benavidez, he wouldn't be able to back away from him, win rounds off a long jab. Right? He wouldn't be able to watch the Caleb Plant fight and say, oh, this is how I can steal some rounds from Benavidez. Everything would be blood and guts. He'd be going for the knockout every round. and he wouldn't have any defense for well-placed uppercuts, right? If you're a Christian Mbilli fan, you need to know the strengths and weaknesses of your fighter. In my favorites folder is the tape. I'll copy the link so that you can pull up the film from the description of this video, right? Don't get me wrong. Mbilli's unbeaten. He's a tough out. He would give Diego Pacheco, another rising star at 168, a hard time, right? But understand he'd have to get by Pacheco's jab. And if Pacheco built up a lead, Pacheco could play stay away. And Mbilli can't. You know, let me say too, this fight's so blood and guts. And Mbilli has experience in later rounds, right? The Gongora fight goes 10. But as you're looking at it, you're wondering if this was a championship fight, if he was facing Canelo, and he had to come out for the 11th and 12th rounds, how effective would he be? In other words, this guy completely empties the tank. He has to, because he doesn't know how to fight slow rounds. At the elite levels, folks, that's a disability. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.